to the House.
Dr. Rajim Bazard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to take a call on the second reading of this bill. And whenever it comes to debating bills of this type in this House, Mr. Speaker, I've had reason to reflect on the many years I've spent working with vulnerable families and vulnerable children, training social workers to work in this field, and indeed researching and writing about many aspects of vulnerable children and vulnerable families. And so when I do that reflection, Mr. Speaker, I recall all of the actions we have taken, and my experiences goes back to 1971. Every time when there has been a proposal to improve the lives of vulnerable children, then a few years later, when we look at the effects of those proposals, you scratch your head and say, well, why did that not achieve its effect? Why is it that now we end up in the 21st century with such a poor record when it comes to child abuse and neglect? How did that happen when since 1971 that I can recall, we have had the kinds of speeches we're having in the House now, that comments to the effect that we have found the answer, and when we put these matters into policy, into legislation rather, and when they are practiced, things will be that much better. I just wish I had that confidence, Mr. Speaker, and nothing I've heard so far gives me that confidence. That's not a reason not to support this bill. They have a reason to support this, and indeed we do. But it's a matter for quiet reflection and on what is it that we ought to be doing that we are not doing, Mr. Speaker. And the question haunts me. Why do we as a country have such an alarming rate of abuse and neglect? And the refrain is, will these set of provisions make the difference? And we can go further in asking those questions. Why is it that a certain section of our communities live lives of quiet desperation, often producing the harm, if you like, that we are designing approaches to resolve? So why does that happen? And why do those communities and those individuals and those families live lives of quiet desperation? And why are the poor, and to some extent certain ethnic groups, overrepresented in this field? And why do we not have conversations about that? Why don't we begin to address those things a lot more comprehensively? And then the refrain is, will these set of provisions enable us to look at improving the lives of the vulnerable in a comprehensive kind of fashion? And the answer is maybe, maybe not. But still, Mr. Speaker, the sadness remains. Why are there so many cases where the subsequent generations produce the same effects? And it's not as if we did not know about them. It's not as if these families and these children have not come to the consciousness of some official. Might be a teacher, might be a Plunkett nurse, might be a recreation person, might be somebody else in the community, a doctor, a nurse, and down the track, colleagues at work, etc. Why is it that despite us knowing them, and in many cases, many of these cases being identified, referred to the agencies, and others have worked on improving the lives of the vulnerable, we fall short, and we fall short so seriously. So we then begin to ask questions about the quality of our interventions. We can create the best set of legislative provisions. It won't make a damn bit of difference, Mr. Speaker, if we do not have the right type of people, highly trained type of people, to actually operationalize the intention of the legislation. Because we have known about abuse and neglect for so long. We have known for so long where it occurs. And yet we have not been able to bring together a comprehensive set of provisions to protect the most vulnerable. Will these set of provisions do that? I'm not so sure, but I hope they will. We can reflect on our adult justice system, Mr. Speaker, and it is littered with those who were vulnerable much early on in life, littered. And why does that happen? In fact, we treat them in such a way that they become the abusers of tomorrow. You know, and therefore we have to look at ourselves as well. So what is the extent to which these provisions have first looked at why we fail? Why have the billions we've spent and the provisions we've made not working? And these matters, Mr. Speaker, worry me. They worry me as a parent, they worry me as a grandparent seeing young children. They worry me as a previous practitioner in this field. And they now worry me as a member of this particular parliament. Over the past 6 years, almost 6 years, I've sat in this House and watched the various provisions we have tried to come up with to address this issue. And at times, and we've always supported any good idea, that this opposition has supported the good idea to say, well, maybe these sets of provisions will make a difference. But at times, I worry, Mr. Speaker, that the other sub-context of the other sub-conversation, if you like, the other conversation that goes on is the way in which we also heap a lot of criticism on these families as well. And we've did it even recently. Whenever we talk about welfare abuse, and when we talk about dependency, and when we talk about those going overseas for a holiday when they ought not to be, whenever we do that, we are pointing a finger at a whole bunch of people who are the vulnerable, from whom these families come. So on this particular occasion, Mr. Speaker, there is no need not to support these provisions, because the provisions themselves will make some difference. And coming to the specific things in the bill, because we share the concern amongst New Zealanders, we do support the provisions here. But will these provisions be enough? I don't know, Mr. Speaker. This bill addresses vulnerability for about 30,000 children. But, Mr. Speaker, the vulnerable that we know is about 300,000 children. And yet we are not actually focusing on that in any comprehensive kind of way. So those who are at risk, if you like, Mr. Speaker, is a much rather pool, a larger pool. And these provisions address some of those. So in maybe another 20 years' time, somebody else will be standing here giving a very similar speech, saying why we're in 2014, why were our provisions not more comprehensive? Because those who are living in poverty are vulnerable, and yet our provisions do not get to them. What we require is a more comprehensive action plan for children that will produce a paradigm shift in the way in which our society thinks about the vulnerable. Because there is something wrong with New Zealand society when it comes to violence. We are very, very tolerant of violence. No matter what we say in this House, this society is very tolerant of violence. Whether it's violence against our children, whether it's violence against our women, whether it's violence men against men, or indeed the way in which we conduct ourselves in our language, etc. And it's somehow is ingrained in the psyche and the personality of New Zealand that we are not addressing, and that wider conversation is not taking place. So this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, looks at some aspects of that, and those we do not argue with. I'm glad that there will be a much more comprehensive look at those families who have had vulnerable children producing others, that we will look at that. So there are many, many aspects of this bill that are worth supporting. But, Mr. Speaker, unless we have highly trained people who are capable of identifying the cases and bringing together high-quality programs to produce the change that's required, this bill will be suboptimal in its effects. But it's still a bill worth supporting. There are some good ideas here, and others we'll talk about during the committee stages. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Materia Ture.
Tēnā tū, Mr. Speaker.